Board voted out single dad vet. Didn't know he held $2.8 billion military contracts. They laughed as they crushed him. But when the forgotten soldier revealed the billions in his hands, the betrayal turned into the most shocking twist of their lives. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn morning sun painted the kitchen in soft golden hues as Jack Harlow stood at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes. The familiar sizzle and sweet aroma filled the modest but well-kept home he shared with his granddaughter Emily. At 10 years old, she was the spitting image of her mother, Jack's late daughter, with the same bright eyes and infectious smile. "Grandpa, you made the Mickey Mouse ones," Emily's delighted voice carried from the doorway. She bounded into the kitchen, her backpack swinging from one shoulder, her dark hair still slightly messy from sleep. "Sure did, sweetie." Jack's weathered face creased with a warm smile. "Can't send my best girl to school without proper fuel for the day." He slid the perfectly golden pancake onto a plate, complete with chocolate chip eyes and a banana smile. Emily climbed onto her usual spot at the kitchen counter, her legs swinging beneath her. "Will you be home for dinner tonight? You promised we could watch that new movie together." Jack carefully poured syrup over her breakfast, just the way she liked it. "You bet. Board meeting shouldn't take more than a few hours." He straightened his tie, navy blue, his lucky one. "I'll pick up some pizza on the way home." "Pepperoni and mushroom?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Would I get anything else?" Jack chuckled, reaching over to smooth down a stubborn cowlick in her hair. "Now eat up before it gets cold." As Emily dug into her breakfast, Jack sipped his coffee, taking in the peaceful moment. Photos lined the kitchen walls. Emily's mother in her graduation gown, Jack's late wife Sarah beaming from their wedding day, Emily's first day of school. Each image held a piece of his heart, reminding him why he worked so hard. The drive to school was filled with Emily's chatter about her upcoming art project and the new girl in her class. Jack listened intently, offering encouragement and advice as they pulled up to the elementary school's drop-off lane. "Have a great day, sweetheart," he said, watching her gather her things. Emily leaned over and gave him a quick hug. "You too, Grandpa. Don't let those boring business people talk too much." She hopped out of the car, joining the stream of students heading into the building. Jack's smile faded slightly as he drove toward the manufacturing plant he'd helped build from the ground up 30 years ago. The familiar brick building loomed ahead, its windows reflecting the morning Sunday. He'd poured his heart and soul into this place, creating jobs for hundreds of local families, including many fellow veterans. The conference room was already full when Jack arrived. Younger executives in expensive suits sat around the long table, their laptops open and phones at the ready. Jack noticed immediately that something felt off. There were too many unfamiliar faces, and the usual friendly greetings were replaced with tight smiles and avoided gazes. "Jack, good of you to join us." Marcus Chen, the newly appointed CFO, gestured to an empty chair. "We have some important matters to discuss." For the next hour, Jack listened with growing disbelief as charts and presentations flashed across the screen. Words like modernization and strategic restructuring filled the air. But it was the undercurrent that bothered him most, the subtle implications that his leadership style was outdated. "The fact is, Jack," Marcus continued, his voice carefully measured, "the board feels the company needs to move in a new direction. Your methods, while admirable, are simply too traditional for today's market." "Traditional?" Jack's voice was quiet but firm. "You mean like providing health care for our workers' families? Or hiring veterans who need a second chance? The profit margins on your veteran training program are unsustainable," another executive chimed in, not meeting Jack's eyes. "And your insistence on keeping manufacturing local instead of outsourcing, those aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet," Jack interrupted, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "Those are people's livelihoods, families we made promises to." "Which is exactly why we think it's time for you to step down," Marcus said smoothly. "You've done great work, Jack, but maybe it's time to focus on your personal life. Your granddaughter must need a lot of attention." The mention of Emily sent a jolt through Jack's chest. He watched in stunned silence as Marcus called for a vote. Hands raised around the table, quick and decisive, like executioners' axes falling. "The motion passes," Marcus announced. Effective immediately, Jack Harlow is removed from his position as chairman of the board. Jack sat perfectly still, his military training keeping his face neutral even as his world crumbled around him. 30 years of dedication, of early mornings and late nights, of missed holidays and sacrificed weekends, all dismissed in a matter of minutes. He gathered his papers with deliberate care, sliding them into the worn leather briefcase Sarah had given him on their 20th anniversary. The other board members were already standing, breaking into small groups, their voices low but relieved. None of them approached him. The walk to the elevator felt endless. Each step echoed on the polished floor. Past offices where he'd mentored young employees, past the wall where Emily's Hope Lives Here painting hung in the employee break room. The security guard, Jim, a Desert Storm veteran Jack had hired 5 years ago, gave him a confused look as he handed over his access badge. Outside, the autumn air hit Jack's face with startling clarity. The briefcase trembled in his grip as the full weight of what had just happened settled over him. Everything he'd built, every promise he'd made to his workers, every dream he'd had for Emily's future, it all seemed to be slipping through his fingers like sand. He stood there, watching leaves skitter across the parking lot, feeling more lost than he had since coming home from Vietnam. The morning's golden promise had faded into a harsh reality, leaving him with one burning question. How was he going to tell Emily? His hands shook as he reached for his car keys, the leather briefcase heavy with more than just papers. It carried the weight of shattered dreams and broken trust. The manufacturing plant loomed behind him, casting a long shadow in the morning sun, no longer the sanctuary of purpose it had been just hours before. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the elementary school's brick walls as Jack Harlow waited in the pickup line. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, still processing the morning's devastating events. The cheerful chaos of children spilling out of the building's double doors provided a stark contrast to the heaviness in his heart. Emily burst through those doors like a ray of sunshine, her backpack bouncing with each skip. Her brown pigtails swung back and forth as she scanned the line of cars, breaking into a wide smile when she spotted her grandfather's familiar blue sedan. Jack forced his features into what he hoped was a convincing smile. "Grandpa!" Emily called out, rushing toward the car with a piece of paper clutched to her chest. She climbed into the back seat, practically vibrating with excitement. "Look what I made in art class today." Jack turned in his seat as Emily proudly held up her drawing. His throat tightened at the sight. There they were, drawn in bright crayon colors, standing hand in hand in front of the factory. The building's red brick walls were decorated with cheerful yellow flowers, and both figures wore enormous smiles. Above them, Emily had written in careful letters, "My grandpa's factory." That's beautiful, sweetheart," Jack managed, his voice rough. "Why don't we put it right on the fridge when we get home?" "Really? You don't think it looks silly?" Emily asked, studying her artwork with a critical eye. "I tried to make the factory look just like it does in real life." "You captured it perfectly," Jack assured her, turning back to navigate the car out of the school parking lot. "You've got quite a talent there." At home, Emily chattered away while Jack prepared dinner, telling him about her day as he moved around the kitchen on autopilot. The familiar motions of cooking, chopping vegetables, stirring the pot of soup, buttering bread, helped steady his hands and calm his racing thoughts. "And guess what, Grandpa?" Emily said, swinging her legs under the kitchen table as she worked on her homework. "Mrs. Peterson chose me to play the lead in our class play." Jack paused in his stirring. "Is that right? Well, that's wonderful news, honey. It's about a brave knight who saves their village." Emily continued, her eyes shining. "We're performing it next Friday evening. You'll come watch me, won't you?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He turned to face his granddaughter, taking in her hopeful expression. With the factory gone, his future was suddenly terrifyingly uncertain. But Emily's face held such trust, such complete faith in her grandfather's promises. "Of course I'll be there," Jack said firmly. "I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world." "No matter what?" Emily pressed, holding up her pinky finger. Jack crossed the kitchen and linked his pinky with hers, his large, weathered finger dwarfing her tiny one. "No matter what. I promise." Emily's face lit up, and she threw her arms around his waist in a tight hug. Jack held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to draw strength from her unwavering love. Dinner was a quiet affair, with Emily occasionally breaking the silence to share more details about her upcoming performance. Jack nodded and smiled at all the right moments, but his mind kept drifting back to the morning's events. the condescending looks from the board members, the practice speech about moving in a new direction, the betrayal that still burned in his chest. After helping Emily with her homework and tucking her into bed, Jack found himself alone in the kitchen. The house felt eerily quiet, filled with the kind of stillness that made a person's thoughts echo too loudly. He pulled out an old photo album from the cabinet above the refrigerator and settled at the kitchen table. The leather cover was worn soft, with age and use. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing the familiar faces that smiled up at him from the pages. There was Sarah, his wife, on their wedding day, her dark hair crowned with white flowers. Another showed her holding their newborn daughter, Catherine, with an expression of pure joy on her tired face. He traced the outline of Catherine's face in a later photo, taken at her high school graduation. She had her mother's smile, the same one Emily wore now, the same one she'd been wearing the day of the accident that took her away, leaving behind a devastated father and a toddler who still asked why her mommy couldn't come home. Jack turned another page, finding a photo of himself in front of the factory on opening day. He'd been so young then, so full of dreams and determination. Sarah had taken the picture, laughing, as he posed proudly by the front entrance. They'd built something remarkable together, not just a business, but a family legacy. Now, sitting in his quiet kitchen with the weight of uncertainty pressing down on his shoulders, Jack struggled to see a path forward. The factory had been more than just his livelihood. It had been his promise to his family, his way of ensuring Emily would always be taken care of. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background as Jack stared at Emily's crayon drawing, now prominently displayed under a butterfly magnet. Her faith in him was absolute, unmarred by doubt or fear. She believed her grandfather could do anything, be anything, overcome any obstacle. Jack closed the photo album gently, running his hand over its worn cover. The faces of his loved ones seemed to follow him. Sarah's gentle wisdom, Catherine's bright spirit, Emily's pure trust. He had made a promise today, not just about a school play, but about being there for his granddaughter no matter what challenges lay ahead. His future might be uncertain, but one thing wasn't. He would find a way to keep that promise. He owed it to Emily. He owed it to Catherine. He owed it to Sarah. And somewhere in the quiet of that kitchen, surrounded by memories and love, Jack Harlow began to feel the first stirrings of determination replacing his despair. The morning light filtered through Jack's kitchen window, casting a soft glow on the worn wooden table where he sat nursing his second cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Emily had just left for school on the bus, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and the lingering ache from yesterday's humiliation. His coffee had grown cold, much like the pit in his stomach. The morning paper lay unopened beside him, its headlines threatening to remind him of a world that seemed to be moving too fast, leaving men like him behind. Jack reached for the coffee pot to warm his cup when the phone rang, its sharp trill cutting through the silence. He wasn't in the mood for calls, especially not from well-meaning neighbors who might have heard about yesterday's board meeting. But something made him reach for the receiver anyway. "Hello?" His voice carried the weight of recent defeat. "Jack? Is that you, old friend?" The familiar voice on the other end made Jack sit up straighter. Colonel Davis, his voice as commanding as ever, even years after retirement. "Colonel?" Jack hadn't heard from Davis in months. "What brings you calling this early?" "Jack, you better sit down for this if you aren't already." There was an unusual excitement in the colonel's typically measured tone. "Something's happened in Washington, something big." Jack's grip tightened on his coffee mug. "What kind of something?" "Those defense contracts you worked on before retiring the ones for the new vehicle systems. Remember those?" Of course I remember. Jack had spent countless hours developing those proposals. But they were shelved years ago, dead in the water. "Not anymore." The colonel paused for effect. "The Pentagon just lit the entire package, every single component you designed. And Jack," Davis's voice grew more intense, "they're worth $2.8 billion. All of it still tied to your name." The coffee mug slipped from Jack's hand, clattering against the table and spilling its contents. He barely noticed. That's impossible." "I'm looking at the approval documents right now," Davis continued. "It's all here in black and white. Your name, your patents, your designs. The Appropriations Committee fast-tracked everything." Jack's legs felt weak, and he was grateful he was sitting down. 2.8 billion? The words felt foreign in his mouth. Colonel, are you sure about this? As sure as I was about anything in 30 years of service. There was a smile in Davis's voice. You're sitting on a gold mine, Jack. And after what those suits did to you yesterday, yes, I heard about that too. This couldn't have come at a better time. The morning sun chose that moment to break through the clouds outside, flooding the kitchen with warm light. Jack's eyes stung, and he wasn't sure if it was from the sudden brightness or the emotions welling up inside him. I don't know what to say, Jack managed, his voice thick with emotion. Yesterday I was washed up, too old-fashioned to matter anymore. And now you're the most valuable player in the game, Davis finished. Sometimes the man upstairs has a sense of humor, doesn't he? Jack stood up slowly, walking to the window. The spilled coffee forgotten. He watched as the sunlight painted the autumn trees in brilliant golds and reds. His mind went to Emily, to the promise he'd made about her school play, to all the promises he'd worried he couldn't keep. The paperwork will be coming your way soon, Davis continued. I'll help you navigate the logistics. But Jack, yes, remember who you are. This kind of money, it changes people. But you've always been solid as a rock. Don't let this change that. Jack nodded, even though his friend couldn't see him. I won't, Colonel. You know me better than that. After a few more minutes of conversation and promises to meet soon, Jack hung up the phone. He remained at the window, watching as the last of the morning clouds parted, letting the sun shine through completely. The world outside looked different, somehow brighter, full of possibility. Maybe there's still a plan for me after all, he whispered to himself, the words carrying a weight of hope he hadn't felt in years. The spilled coffee gradually spread across the morning paper, but Jack didn't move to clean it up just yet. He stood there, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him, his mind spinning with possibilities not just for himself, but for all the people he could help, all the wrongs he could right. The numbers were almost too big to comprehend. $2.8 billion. But more than the money, it was the vindication that moved him, the sense that perhaps his old-fashioned values weren't so outdated after all. His hands, which had trembled with anger and humiliation just yesterday, were now steady and sure. The same hands that had drafted those contracts years ago, that had built a company from nothing, that now helped Emily with her homework. Every night they still had work to do. Important work. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background, marking the moment when everything changed. But even as his world tilted on its axis, Jack felt his feet planted firmly on the ground, anchored by the same principles that had guided him through war, loss, and countless challenges. In the distance, a church bell chimed, its clear tones carrying across the quiet morning. It reminded Jack of Emily's words from the night before, asking him if he'd make it to her school play. He smiled, knowing now that he could do so much more than just attend a play. He could ensure her future, and perhaps the futures of many others too. Through the window, Jack watched as a neighbor walked past with their dog, waving cheerfully. He waved back, the simple gesture feeling somehow more meaningful now. The morning that had started with the bitter taste of yesterday's defeat had transformed into something entirely different. That bitter taste was replaced by something sweeter, the taste of possibility, of hope, renewed. Jack's weathered pickup truck rumbled down Main Street, past the familiar storefronts that had barely changed in 30 years. The local law office of Matthews & Sons occupied the same red brick building where Jack had first signed the papers to start his company. Now, decades later, he was back but under very different circumstances. Sarah Matthews, daughter of his old friend and the firm's founder, waited for him at the entrance. Her professional demeanor softened when she saw him. "Jack, come on in. Dad always said you were the most honest businessman he ever knew." Inside her office, with its dark wood panels and the smell of old leather books, Jack settled into a chair across from Sarah's desk. He placed Colonel Davis's documents in front of her. "I need to understand what these contracts mean, Sarah. Everything happened so fast yesterday with the board vote, and now this." His voice trailed off as she began reviewing the papers. Sarah's expression changed as she read, her brow furrowing. She pulled out additional files from her cabinet, comparing documents side by side. "Jack, when exactly did Colonel Davis call you about these contracts?" "This morning. Why?" She laid down her pen and met his eyes. "Because according to these internal memos from your board, They knew about the Pentagon's plans 3 weeks ago. Jack felt his stomach clench. What? There's more. Sarah spread out several papers. They've been preparing for this. Look at these dated communications between board members. They deliberately scheduled the vote before the Pentagon's announcement. The reality of what she was saying hit Jack like a physical blow. He leaned forward, scanning the documents. There were emails, meeting minutes, carefully worded legal preparations, all pointing to a calculated plan to remove him just before the contracts became active. They knew, he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. They pushed me out, knowing these billions would be coming in. Sarah nodded grimly. They figured once you were voted out, they could claim the contract since the company still technically holds partial rights. They didn't count on the Pentagon keeping the contracts tied to your name personally. Jack stood up and walked to the window, watching people pass by on the sidewalk below. These were his neighbors, people he'd known for years. The betrayal cut deeper than he'd imagined possible. Some of those board members, he said, I've known them since they were kids, gave them their first jobs, mentored them. He turned back to Sarah. Tom Reynolds, I helped put his son through college when they were struggling. Sarah shuffled through more papers. Tom Reynolds was actually one of the main architects of this plan, according to these emails. Jack sank back into his chair, feeling every one of his 68 years. How do people become so consumed by greed? The question is, Sarah said, straightening the papers, what do you want to do about it? Legally, you're in a very strong position. The contracts are yours. You could destroy them, Jack. Take everything they tried to steal and leave them with nothing. Jack rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. Part of me wants to do exactly that. Make them feel what I felt yesterday. He paused, remembering Emily's drawing of them standing in front of the factory. But that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be for my granddaughter. Sarah smiled softly. That's why Dad always respected you so much. But Jack, you don't have to choose between revenge and rolling over. There might be a middle path. They spent the next hour discussing options, legal strategies, and potential paths forward. By the time Jack stood to leave, his briefcase was heavy with documents, but his mind was clearer. Thanks, Sarah. Your father would be proud of how you've carried on his legacy. We're not done here, Jack, she said, walking him to the door. This is just the beginning. Whatever you decide to do, I'm in your corner. The late afternoon sun was sinking behind the buildings as Jack walked to his truck. The factory smokestack was visible in the distance, still bearing his family name. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment before starting the engine. The drive home was slow, each familiar turn giving him time to wrestle with his thoughts. The steering wheel creaked under his tight grip as he imagined facing the board members again, not as a defeated old man, but as someone holding all the cards. He could ruin them. The thought was tempting, like a sweet poison. They deserved it after what they'd done, after how they'd plotted against him. One signature from him could start a chain reaction that would tear down everything they'd tried to steal. But with each mile closer to home, Jack thought about Emily, about the values he wanted to teach her, about the kind of man he wanted to be remembered as. The anger was still there, burning in his chest, but something else was fighting against it, something that felt more like his true self. At a red light, Jack noticed his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at him was tired but determined. The same face that had made it through Vietnam, that had buried a wife and daughter, that had picked itself up after countless setbacks. He wasn't about to let greed and bitterness change who he was now. The truck rolled to a stop in his driveway as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. Emily would be home from her friend's house soon, probably full of stories about her day. Jack sat there, hands still on the wheel, caught between the pull of justified vengeance and the steady voice of his conscience. The autumn evening painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple as Jack and Emily sat on their worn wooden porch swing. The gentle creaking of its chains matched their slow, peaceful rhythm. Emily held her sketchbook close, occasionally adding details to her latest drawing while Jack nursed a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The familiar scent of Mrs. Henderson's apple pies wafted over from next door, mixing with the earthy smell of fallen leaves. Jack watched a group of birds soar overhead, their V formation perfect against the darkening sky. He wished life could be that simple, following a clear path, knowing exactly where to go. Emily stopped drawing and looked up at her grandfather, her small face creased with concern as she studied his expression. "Grandpa," she said softly, setting her sketchbook aside, "did mean people at your job hurt you today?" The question caught Jack off guard. He turned to face his granddaughter, seeing in her eyes the same perceptiveness her mother had possessed. His throat tightened. How do you explain betrayal to a child who still believes in the goodness of everyone? "What makes you think that, sweetheart?" he asked, buying time to gather his thoughts. Emily fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "You look sad when you picked me up from school, and you barely touched your spaghetti at dinner." She paused, then added, "And you didn't laugh at my joke about the penguin wearing a raincoat." "You always laugh at my jokes, even the silly ones." Jack's heart ached. He thought he'd hidden his pain better, but children, especially ones as observant as Emily, had a way of seeing through adult pretenses. "Some people at work did make some choices that hurt me," he admitted carefully. "But sometimes that happens in life. What matters is how we respond." Emily scooted closer, leaning against his arm. "Did they say sorry?" "No, honey, they didn't." "Then they're not very nice people," Emily declared with the straightforward logic of a child. "Mrs. Thompson at school says when we hurt someone, we should always say sorry and try to make it better." Jack wrapped an arm around her small shoulders, pulling her close. The simple wisdom in her words struck him deeply. Here he was, wrestling with complex emotions of betrayal and revenge, while his granddaughter could see right to the heart of the matter. "You know what?" Emily continued, picking up her sketchbook again. "When Tommy pushed me down last week, I was really mad. I wanted to push him back." She flipped through her drawings until she found one of a playground. "But instead, I drew him a picture of us being friends. Now, he sits with me at lunch sometimes." Jack stared at his granddaughter, seeing her in a new light. While he'd been considering ways to get even with the board, Emily had shown him a different path, one of creation rather than destruction. The sunset's golden light caught Emily's face as she looked up at him expectantly. In that moment, Jack saw not just his granddaughter but his entire world. She was his daughter's legacy, his reason for pressing forward, his daily reminder that love trumps bitterness. She needed him to be not just her grandfather, but her hero, her moral compass, her example of how to face life's challenges with grace and dignity. "Emily," he said, his voice growing stronger, "you're absolutely right. Instead of being angry at the mean people, we can build something new, something better." Her eyes lit up. "Like what, Grandpa?" "Like a new company," he said, the idea taking shape as he spoke. "A place where people treat each other with kindness and respect, where we help others and create good things for our community." Emily bounced excitedly on the swing. "Can I help? I could paint pictures for the walls, and maybe make signs that say, 'Be kind,' and 'Everyone welcome,' like we have at school." Jack felt warmth spread through his chest, replacing the cold anger that had been residing there. "You know what? That's exactly what we need. Every good company needs an artist." "Really?" Emily's whole face glowed with pride. "Really," Jack confirmed. "And you know what else? We'll make it a place where people like me, veterans who served our country, can work and feel proud, where single parents can find good jobs with fair pay, just like your mom would have wanted." Emily wrapped her small arms around Jack's waist, hugging him tight. "That sounds beautiful, Grandpa. Can we make it have lots of windows? Mom always said sunshine makes everything better." Jack felt tears prick at his corners of his eyes as he held his granddaughter close. "Absolutely, sweetheart. Lots of windows." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head and whispered, "Together, we're going to make something beautiful out of this mess. I promise." The porch swings swayed gently as they held each other, the last rays of sunlight warming their faces. In Emily's innocent wisdom and unwavering love, Jack had found his answer. He didn't need revenge or retaliation. He needed to build something worthy of the faith this little girl had in him, something that would make both his late wife and daughter proud. The evening air grew cooler, and crickets began their nightly chorus. Emily snuggled closer, her small hand finding his larger one. "Grandpa?" she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you're not going to be sad anymore, and I can't wait to make our new place beautiful." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm squares of light across the oak table, where Jack Saturday, the familiar scent of coffee, filled the air as he hunched over several sheets of blank paper, his weathered hands gripping a pencil. His brow furrowed in concentration as he began sketching rough outlines of building layouts and organizational charts. Emily padded into the kitchen in her favorite pink pajamas decorated with cartoon unicorns, her dark hair still tousled from sleep. She rubbed her eyes and peered at Jack's work. "What are you drawing, Grandpa?" Jack looked up and smiled. "Just some plans, sweetheart. Want to help?" Emily's face lit up. She scampered to her art corner in the living room and returned with a well-worn box of crayons, some already worn down to stubs. "We can make it pretty." Jack cleared a space beside him, and Emily climbed onto a chair, kneeling to reach the table better. She studied his sketches with serious concentration. "Is this going to be your new factory?" "Something like that," Jack said, watching as she carefully selected a blue crayon. "But it's going to be different from the old one. Special." Emily began coloring the roof of the building he'd drawn. "Special how?" "Well," Jack said, reaching for the phone. "Remember how I told you about my friends from the Army? I think it's time to give them a call." As Emily continued coloring, Jack dialed a number he knew by heart. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. "Mike, it's Jack Harlow. Remember that conversation we had about starting something new?" He paused, listening. "How'd you like to help me build something worthwhile?" Over the next hour, Jack made more calls, while Emily transformed his simple sketches into vibrant artwork. She added flowers around the building's perimeter and drew smiling stick figures holding hands in front of the entrance. When she reached for a yellow crayon, she accidentally knocked over Jack's coffee mug. Quick as lightning, Jack caught it before more than a few drops could spill. "Sorry, Grandpa." Emily's eyes went wide with worry. Jack chuckled, grabbing a napkin to dab at the tiny puddle. "No harm done, sweetheart. Actually, you just reminded me of something important." He pulled a fresh sheet of paper closer and began writing. "We'll need a break room with good coffee. Real coffee, not that cheap stuff they had at the old place." Emily wrinkled her nose. "Coffee is yucky. Hot chocolate, too," Jack added with a wink, making her giggle. As the morning wore on, Jack's list of names grew longer. Mike Sullivan, his old platoon sergeant who'd been struggling to find steady work. Sarah Chen, a brilliant engineer and single mother who'd been passed over for promotion too many times. James Rodriguez, a Desert Storm veteran with a knack for logistics. Emily watched him scribbling names and numbers. "Are these all your friends?" "Some are friends. Some are people who deserve a chance." Jack tapped his pencil thoughtfully. "You know how sometimes kids at school don't get picked for teams even though they're really good players?" Emily nodded solemnly. "Like Tommy. He uses crutches, but he's super smart at math." "Exactly. Well, there are grown-ups like that too. People who are smart and hard-working but don't get picked for jobs because they're different, or because they have kids to take care of, or because they served in the military like I did." "That's not fair," Emily declared, adding another flower to her drawing. "No, it's not," Jack agreed. "That's why we're going to do things differently." The phone rang again, and Jack recognized Mike's number. "Mike, you talked to Sarah already? That's great." He grabbed his pencil. "Yes, we'll need her engineering expertise. And tell her we'll have on-site childcare." He glanced at Emily, who was now drawing what appeared to be a rainbow over the factory. "We'll make it work for everyone." By lunchtime, the kitchen table was covered in papers. Emily's colorful illustrations, Jack's rough blueprints, and pages of notes and numbers. Jack made them both grilled cheese sandwiches, cutting Emily's into triangles the way she liked. "What's that?" Emily pointed to a separate sheet where Jack had been working on a company logo. "That's going to be our symbol," Jack explained. "See how it shows hands helping each other? That's what we're all about." Emily studied it, then reached for her crayons again. "It needs more colors," she decided, and Jack didn't stop her as she added her own artistic touch to the design. The afternoon brought more calls, more planning. Jack's old contacts led to new ones. A retired banker offered guidance on financing. A local realtor mentioned an available industrial space on the edge of town. With each call, the dream became more concrete, more possible. As evening approached, Emily yawned, and Jack realized how late it had gotten. "Time for bed, sweetheart." "But I'm not finished," Emily protested, pointing to her half-colored picture of what she called the Hope Factory. "It'll be here tomorrow," Jack promised, helping her gather her crayons. "You've been a wonderful helper today." Emily hugged him tight. "Can I help tomorrow too?" "Of course." Jack lifted her easily, despite his aging joints. This is going to be for both of us. Upstairs, Jack tucked Emily into bed, making sure her favorite stuffed elephant was properly positioned under the covers. "Grandpa," she murmured sleepily, "is this going to be better than your old job?" Jack smoothed her hair back. "Much better," he said softly. "Because this time, we're building it the right way." After Emily fell asleep, Jack returned to the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets through the slightly open window. He spread the day's work before him on the table, reviewing notes and adding new ones under the warm glow of the overhead light. His eyes fell on Emily's colorful contributions to his plans. Where he had drawn straight lines and practical layouts, she had added life and warmth. Her rainbow arched over the factory like a promise. Her stick figures, representing workers and their families, held hands in a circle of unity. Jack pulled out his old leather briefcase, the one he'd carried out of his last board meeting, and began organizing the papers. This time, instead of feeling the weight of defeat, he felt the strength of purpose. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about creating something meaningful, something that would make Emily proud. His pencil moved across fresh paper, sketching out more detailed plans. The numbers needed to work, but the heart of it needed to work too. Every decision would be measured not just by profit, but by its impact on people's lives. As he worked into the night, his resolve grew stronger with each passing hour. The bell above Mac's diner jingled as Jack pushed through the glass door. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon wrapped around him like a warm blanket. At this early hour, the place was quiet except for the clink of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation. In their usual corner booth sat three men Jack had known since Vietnam. Mike Thompson, whose prosthetic leg rested against the vinyl seat. Dave Martinez, who still wore his hair regulation short despite being retired for 15 years. And Sam Wilson, whose dark hands were wrapped around a steaming coffee mug. "Morning, fellas," Jack said, sliding into the booth. "Jack." They nodded in unison. There was concern in their eyes. News traveled fast in small towns, and they'd all heard about the board meeting. Betty, the longtime waitress, appeared with a fresh pot of coffee. "The usual, Jack?" "Just coffee today, Betty." "Thanks." He waited until she filled his cup and moved away before leaning forward. "I've got something I want to run by you boys." Mike raised an eyebrow. "This about what happened at the factory?" "Sort of." Jack took a slow sip of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I've got these defense contracts, big ones. And instead of letting those vultures get their hands on them, I'm thinking of starting fresh, building something new." Dave frowned. "Starting fresh? At our age?" "Age is just a number," Jack replied, pulling out some sketched plans from his briefcase. "I'm talking about a company that puts people first. Veterans, single parents, folks who deserve a real chance." Sam set down his coffee cup. "Sound nice, Jack, but business ain't about being nice. Those executives who pushed you out, they know that." "Maybe that's the problem," Jack said, his voice firm. "Maybe we've forgotten what really matters. Remember how it was in Nam? We looked out for each other. No man left behind." The three men exchanged glances, decades-old memories flickering across their faces. "I've got my eye on that old Patterson warehouse," Jack continued. "It needs work, but the bones are good. With the right people, we could have it up and running in months." Mike shook his head slowly. "It's a big risk, Jack. We're not young men anymore." "Neither were we when we served," Jack countered. "But we did what needed doing." The diner's door jingled again. Tom Riley, another veteran who'd served 2 tours in Desert Storm, walked in. He must have heard them talking because he pulled up a chair to their booth. "Word's getting around," Tom said, his eyes bright with interest. "You really planning to take on those corporate boys, Jack?" Before Jack could answer, 2 more veterans entered, brothers who'd served in Afghanistan. They joined the growing group, pulling chairs from nearby tables. Betty watched from behind the counter, smiling as the impromptu gathering grew. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the silver in their hair and the earnest expressions on their faces. Jack spread his plans across the table, explaining his vision. The skepticism in his old friend's eyes began to fade, replaced by something he recognized from their service days: determination. "The warehouse needs cleaning up," Dave admitted, studying the plans. "But I've still got my contractor's license. Could help get it up to code." Sam nodded slowly. "My nephew's an electrician. He's been looking for steady work. I know some guys from the VFW who'd jump at the chance," Mike added. "Good men. Reliable." One by one, they began offering what they could. Skills, connections, ideas. The energy in the diner shifted, charged with possibility. These were men who'd faced impossible odds before and come through together. "It won't be easy," Jack warned them. "We'll be starting from scratch, going up against people with deep pockets." "When has easy ever been our style?" Tom grinned, and a ripple of knowing laughter went around the group. By the time they left the diner, the morning had stretched into early afternoon. They drove out to the Patterson warehouse in a small convoy of pickup trucks and sedans. The building stood at the edge of town, its red brick walls solid despite years of neglect. Jack pulled out the key he'd gotten from the realtor and unlocked the heavy front door. They filed in, boots crunching on dusty concrete. Shafts of sunlight pierced through high windows, illuminating the vast empty space. "Needs a good cleaning," Dave observed, running a hand along a support beam. "But the structure's sound." They walked the space together, voices echoing as they pointed out what needed fixing and what could be salvaged. Their footsteps stirred up dust motes that danced in the sunlight, but Jack could already see past the grime to what could be. The men left one by one as afternoon faded, each with tasks assigned and a sense of purpose renewed. Jack stayed behind, standing in the middle of the empty warehouse floor. The silence was different now, not dead but waiting. He could almost hear the ghost of machinery humming, the buzz of voices, the promise of life returning to this forgotten place. In the gathering dusk, that spark of hope he'd felt at his kitchen table grew stronger. This wasn't just about him anymore, or even about proving the board wrong. This was about building something that mattered, about giving people, good people, a chance to work with dignity. He reached down and picked up a small piece of metal from the floor, turning it over in his hands. The past few days had felt like his world was ending. But standing here now, he realized it wasn't an ending at all. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them, its metal siding dulled by years of neglect. Jack stood with his small group of veterans in the early morning light, armed with brooms, mops, and determination. Mike Thompson leaned on his good leg, studying the building's facade with a critical eye. "Needs work," Mike said, adjusting his Vietnam veteran's cap, "but she's got good bones." Jack nodded, fishing the key from his pocket. The lock was stiff, but it finally turned with a rusty groan. Sunlight pierced the darkness through grimy windows, revealing a vast space filled with dust, cobwebs, and forgotten dreams. "First things first," Jack announced, his voice echoing. "Let's get some light in here." The men spread out, attacking different areas with quiet efficiency. Steve Martinez, who'd been an electrician before and after his service, went straight for the breaker box. Tom Wilson and his son started hauling debris to the dumpster outside. The methodical work reminded Jack of base cleanup duties, the military precision still ingrained in all of them. Emily sat cross-legged near the entrance, her art supplies spread around her like a colorful moat. She'd begged to come along, promising to make the place pretty. Now her small face was scrunched in concentration as she sketched on a large piece of paper. "Looking good, sweetheart," Jack called out, pausing his sweeping to wipe sweat from his forehead. "It's a surprise, Grandpa," she replied, shielding her work with her body. "No peeking." By mid-morning, the transformation was already visible. Steve had most of the overhead lights working, casting a warm glow over the space. The concrete floor emerged from under layers of grime, and the windows let in natural light after Tom's son attacked them with glass cleaner. A truck rumbled outside, and Jack looked up to see Sarah Chin from the hardware store backing up to the loading dock. She hopped out, grinning. "Heard you folks could use some supplies," she called out. "I've got paint, some basic tools, and those fluorescent tubes you asked about, Steve." Before Jack could reach for his wallet, Sarah waved him off. "Consider it an investment in the community," she said firmly. "My father was a veteran too." Word spread quickly in their small town. By afternoon, the warehouse had become a hub of activity. Maria Rodriguez, a single mother of 3, showed up with sandwiches for everyone. Behind her came Bill Peterson, who'd lost his factory job last year, asking if there might be work once they got running. "We're not ready to hire yet," Jack started to say, but Bill cut him off. "I'm not here for a job today," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm here to help build something worth being part of." The afternoon brought more volunteers, laid-off workers, veterans from other conflicts, people who'd heard through the grapevine that Jack Harlow was starting something new. Each brought what they could, tools, supplies, or simply willing hands. As Jack directed traffic and coordinated efforts, He watched Emily working on her section of wall. She'd gotten permission to paint a mural, and her small hands moved with surprising confidence. Whatever she was creating, she had the same look of determination he'd seen on her mother's face so many times. "Jack!" Mike called from across the floor. "Come look at this." In a back corner, they'd uncovered several perfectly good workbenches. "Just need some TLC," Mike said, already sanding one down. "Saved us a few thousand right there." The sun was low in the sky when Emily finally stepped back from her wall, paint smudged on her cheeks and clothes. "Grandpa," she called softly. "It's ready." Jack walked over, and his breath caught in his throat. There, in bright colors and careful letters, Emily had painted "Hope Lives Here" against a background of rising sun rays. Below the words, she'd painted figures holding hands, some in wheelchairs, some with prosthetic limbs, some carrying children on their shoulders. They formed a circle around what was unmistakably the warehouse itself. "Do you like it?" Emily asked, suddenly shy. "I wanted to show everybody belongs here." Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. He knelt beside his granddaughter, not caring about the paint that was getting on his knees. The mural captured everything he'd been trying to put into words. The vision of a place where people could find not just work, but dignity and community. "It's perfect, sweetheart," he managed to say, pulling her into a tight hug. "Absolutely perfect." The other workers gathered around, admiring Emily's creation. In the fading light, with the newly cleaned windows glowing and Emily's mural brightening the wall, the warehouse no longer felt abandoned. It felt like possibility. It felt like hope. Jack smiled through his tears, holding Emily close. She'd seen straight to the heart of what he was trying to build. Not just a company, but a home for second chances and new beginnings. The church bells chimed softly across the sleepy town as Jack and Emily walked hand in hand up the worn stone steps of First Methodist. The morning sun cast long shadows through the stained glass windows, painting the wooden pews in splashes of red, blue, and gold. Emily's yellowed dress swished as she skipped ahead, her patent leather shoes clicking against the floor. "Grandpa, can we sit in the front today?" Emily tugged at his sleeve, her eyes bright with excitement. Jack smoothed down his tie, managing a small smile. "Sure, sweetheart. Lead the way." As they settled into the front pew, familiar faces turned to greet them. Mrs. Peterson, who'd taught Sunday school for 30 years, reached over to squeeze Jack's shoulder. Tom Martinez, a fellow veteran who'd served in Desert Storm, nodded respectfully. The sense of community wrapped around Jack like a warm blanket. Pastor Wilson stepped up to the pulpit, his kind eyes finding Jack's. The sermon that morning was about David facing Goliath, about faith in the face of overwhelming odds. Jack couldn't help but see the parallel to his own situation. Emily leaned against his arm, drawing pictures of angels in her little notebook. When the sermon ended, Pastor Wilson called Jack forward. "Brothers and sisters," he announced, his voice carrying through the hushed sanctuary, "one of our own needs our prayers today." Jack felt Emily's small hand slip into his as they walked to the front. The congregation gathered around them, forming a circle of support. Weathered hands reached out to touch his shoulders. Mrs. Peterson held Emily close. "Lord," Pastor Wilson began, "we lift up Jack Harlow and his mission to serve this community. Give him strength when the path seems dark. Give him wisdom when decisions weigh heavy. And Lord, bless the work of his hands." "Amen," the congregation echoed, their voices blending in harmony. After the service, people lingered to offer encouragement. Veterans shared their contact information, promising to spread the word about job opportunities. Single mothers asked about positions in administration and accounting. The town's retired machinist offered to train new workers for free. Over coffee and donuts in the church basement, Jack pulled out his notebook. The pages filled quickly with names, numbers, and possibilities. Emily proudly showed her drawings to anyone who would look, explaining how she was helping decorate the warehouse. "You know, Jack," Tom Martinez said, pulling up a chair, "I've got some connections at Maxwell Air Force Base. They're always looking for reliable suppliers for small components. Nothing fancy, but it could be a start." Jack's eyes lit up. "Tom, that could be exactly what we need to get rolling." By Monday morning, Jack was in his makeshift office, really just a cleared corner of the warehouse with a borrowed desk. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since word got out about the new venture. He carefully reviewed each potential contract, no matter how small. "Sir." Sarah Johnson, a single mother he'd hired as office manager, poked her head in. "The training session is about to start. Everyone's gathered in the main area." Jack walked out to find 30 people seated in folding chairs, their faces eager and nervous. Some were veterans still wearing their military boots. Others were parents who'd struggled to find work that would let them care for their children. All of them needed a chance. "Good morning," Jack began, his voice steady and warm. "First thing you should know, we're family here. Everyone gets treated with respect, everyone gets paid what they're worth, and everyone helps each other succeed." The workers nodded, sitting up straighter. Jack saw hope flickering in their eyes, the same hope he'd felt in church yesterday. Throughout the day, Jack moved from station to station, learning each person's story. He adjusted schedules to accommodate school pickups, arranged carpools, and made sure everyone had the training they needed. When equipment jammed, he rolled up his sleeves and worked alongside them until the problem was solved. By late afternoon, the first batch of parts was complete. Simple components, but made with pride and precision. Jack inspected each one personally, nodding with satisfaction. "Quality work," he told the team. "This is how we build trust, one perfect part at a time." Sarah brought him the day's financial reports before heading home. The numbers were tight, but they were making it work. Every worker would receive their full pay, even if it meant Jack took less himself. As the sun set, Jack locked up the warehouse. Emily's mural glowed in the fading light, its message clear and strong. "Hope lives here." The words felt more true with each passing day. At home, after tucking Emily into bed, Jack knelt beside his own bed. The moonlight filtered through his window, casting a gentle glow on the photograph of his late wife on the nightstand. "Lord," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for this second chance. Thank you for showing me that sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning. Help me be worthy of the trust these people have placed in me." He paused, touching the wedding ring he still wore. "And Martha, if you can hear me, I think you'd be proud of what we're building here. It's not just a company, it's a family, just like you always wanted." Jack remained there for a moment longer, feeling a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he could rest knowing he was on the right path. The path of service, dignity, and hope. Jack stood in his kitchen, morning coffee forgotten, as he read the official letter for the third time. The presidential seal at the top of the cream-colored paper gleamed in the early light. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he absorbed the words. He was being invited to Washington, D.C. to receive special recognition for his work with veterans. "Grandpa, what's that?" Emily bounced into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her curious eyes caught the formal letterhead. Jack cleared his throat. "Well, sweetheart, it seems we're going on a little trip to Washington." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? Like where the president lives?" "That's right." Jack smiled, setting the letter down. "They want to give your old grandpa an award for helping veterans start new jobs." "I knew you were special." Emily threw her arms around his waist. "Can I come too?" "Of course you can. In fact, I need your help with something very important." Jack led her upstairs to his bedroom closet. "I haven't worn a proper suit in years. Think you can help me pick one out?" Emily took her task seriously, pushing hangers aside with careful consideration. She wrinkled her nose at his old brown suit. "Not that one, Grandpa. It looks like coffee." She continued searching until she found a navy blue suit tucked in the back. "This one. It's the color of heroes." Jack chuckled. "Heroes, huh?" "Yes, like police officers and sailors." She pulled the suit out, checking for dust. "And it matches your eyes." Over the next few days, they prepared for the trip. Emily helped iron his shirt, though Jack had to redo it when she wasn't looking. She practiced introducing herself to imaginary politicians and insisted on packing her best dress, the yellow one with white daisies that her grandmother had bought her last Easter. The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and bright. Jack and Emily took a taxi from their hotel to the grand government building where the ceremony would be held. Emily's eyes grew round as she took in the massive marble columns and gleaming floors. "It's like a castle," she whispered, gripping Jack's hand. They were led to a grand hall filled with distinguished guests, military officers in full dress uniforms, politicians in expensive suits, and other veterans being honored. Emily found her seat in the front row, smoothing her dress carefully as she sat down. When Jack's name was called, he walked to the podium with military precision, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The lights felt warm on his face as he looked out at the crowd, finding Emily's encouraging smile. "Thank you for this honor," he began, his voice steady and clear. "But I'm not standing here today because of what I've done. I'm here because of what others believed I could do." He paused, meeting Emily's gaze. "A few months ago, I thought my purpose was finished. I'd been pushed aside, told I was too old-fashioned, too set in my ways." The audience grew silent, hanging on his words. "But then I remembered something my late wife used to say. When God closes a door, He doesn't just open a window, He builds a better house." Jack smiled at the gentle laughter. "That's what we're doing back home. We're building something better. Not just a company, but a community. A place where veterans can find purpose again, where single parents can support their families with dignity, where hope isn't just a word on a wall, though my granddaughter did paint it beautifully." Emily beamed from her seat, sitting up straighter. "Success isn't measured by profit margins or stock prices," Jack continued. "It's measured by the lives we touch, the faith we keep, and the legacy we leave for our children." His voice softened. "I look at my granddaughter, and I see the future we're building. A future where integrity matters more than influence, where compassion counts more than capital." As Jack concluded his speech, the hall erupted in applause. Emily jumped to her feet, clapping harder than anyone. Tears glistened in her eyes as she watched her grandfather receive his award, a beautiful crystal eagle mounted on a wooden base. After the ceremony, they flew home to find their small town had prepared a surprise. As their taxi turned onto their street, Emily pressed her face against the window in wonder. Both sides of the road were lined with people holding welcome signs. Veterans stood at attention, offering crisp salutes as Jack stepped out of the car. Neighbors cheered and waved flags. Someone had hung a banner across the street that read, "Welcome home, Jack." Emily's mural design of "Hope Lives Here" had been recreated on it. Mrs. Peterson from next door hurried forward with a bouquet of flowers for Emily. "We watched the ceremony on the live stream at the community center," she explained, hugging them both. "Jack, that speech brought tears to everyone's eyes." Jack felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and support. Emily squeezed his hand, looking up at him with pure adoration. "See, Grandpa? I told you the blue suit was for heroes." Together, they walked toward their front door, passing through the crowd of well-wishers. Veterans who worked at the new company stood proudly in their work uniforms. Single mothers Jack had hired held their children up to wave. The town had become more than a community. It had become a family. At their front porch, Jack paused with Emily's hand still in his. He held his Crystal Eagle Award in his other hand. But the real prize was the knowledge that he'd stayed true to his values and shown his granddaughter what really mattered in life. "Ready to go inside, sweetheart?" he asked. Emily nodded, her yellow dress swishing as they climbed the familiar steps together. Jack's morning ritual of reading the local paper over coffee turned bitter as his eyes caught the headline, "War Profiteer or Hero? The Dark Truth Behind Jack Harlow's Millions." The mug trembled in his weathered hands as he scanned the article, each word hitting him like a physical blow. "This can't be right," he muttered, spreading the paper flat on his kitchen table. The story painted him as a ruthless opportunist who had manipulated his military connections for personal gain. It claimed he had deliberately hidden the defense contracts, waiting for the perfect moment to seize control. The phone started ringing. Jack let it go to voicemail, his eyes fixed on the paper. The reporter had quoted anonymous sources close to the situation. Jack knew exactly who those sources were. The same board members who had pushed him out were now trying to destroy his reputation. More calls came in throughout the morning. Some were from reporters seeking comment. Others were from people he'd known for decades, their voices tight with disappointment or accusation. Each conversation left him feeling more isolated. At the grocery store that afternoon, Jack noticed the whispers and sidelong glances. Mrs. Peterson, who had brought him casseroles after his wife passed, hurriedly switched aisles when she saw him coming. The checkout clerk, whose father had served with Jack in Vietnam, couldn't meet his eyes. "Your total is $47.82, the young man mumbled, handling Jack's money like it was tainted. Walking through the parking lot, Jack overheard two elderly men talking near their cars. "Always seemed like such a decent fellow," one said, shaking his head. "Just goes to show you never really know someone. Heard he's been planning this for years," the other replied, using those poor veterans as cover while he lines his pockets. Jack's hands clenched around his grocery bags. He wanted to turn around, to defend himself, to tell them about the countless nights he'd spent helping veteran families find housing, about the Christmas presents he'd quietly provided for their children. But he knew it would only make things worse. The next day brought more articles. The stories grew more outrageous, claiming Jack had deliberately sabotaged the old company to drive down its value. Some suggested he had manufactured safety violations to force out workers who opposed him. Each lie was crafted to erode the trust he'd spent a lifetime building. At church on Sunday, half the pews around him were empty. Pastor Roberts gave him a stiff nod instead of the usual warm embrace. The same people who had prayed over his mission just weeks ago now treated him like a pariah. After the service, Margaret Collins, whose son Jack had helped get into rehab, approached him with tears in her eyes. "How could you, Jack?" she whispered. "We trusted you." "Margaret, none of it's true," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "You know me better than that." She just shook her head and walked away, leaving Jack standing alone in the chapel he'd helped rebuild after the tornado of '85. The workplace felt different too. Some of his veteran employees started questioning his motives, poisoned by the constant stream of accusations. Jack caught them watching him suspiciously when he reviewed the books or made phone calls. Even his old friend Tom Davidson, who'd served beside him in Vietnam, came to his office with doubt in his eyes. "Level with me, Jack," Tom said, settling heavily into the chair across from him. "These stories they're printing, there's nothing to them, right?" "Tom, you've known me for 40 years. Jack replied, the hurt evident in his voice. "You were there when I carried Jimmy Peterson through that jungle, when I stayed up nights helping veterans navigate their benefits. Does any of this sound like me?" Tom shifted uncomfortably. "People change, Jack. Power changes them." "Not me, Tom. Not ever." But he could see the uncertainty lingering in his friend's face as he left. The final blow came when Emily burst through the front door that afternoon, her backpack sliding off her shoulder and her face streaked with tears. Jack's heart clenched at the sight of her distress. "Grandpa," she sobbed, running into his arms. "Why are they saying such mean things about you?" Jack held her close, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "What happened, sweetheart?" "Tommy Miller said. He said you're a bad man who steals from people." Emily hiccuped. "And Sarah wouldn't sit with me at lunch because her mom said you're not honest anymore." Jack's throat tightened as he stroked her hair, remembering how proud she'd been of him just days ago in Washington. Emily pulled back slightly, her blue eyes, so like her mother's, searching his face. "Grandpa?" she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. Are you the bad man they say you are?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow, stealing his breath. All the accusations, all the turnbacks and cold shoulders hadn't hurt nearly as much as seeing the doubt in his granddaughter's eyes. This little girl was his whole world, the reason he got up every morning, the future he was fighting to secure. He cupped her tear-stained face in his hands, his own vision blurring. "Emily, look at me," he said softly. "You know who I am. You know what's in my heart. Sometimes people say untrue things because they're scared or angry or want something that isn't theirs." But he could see the confusion in her eyes, the way the cruel words had shaken her faith in him. His heart shattered, knowing that his granddaughter, his precious Emily, was suffering because of others' greed and malice. The warehouse felt colder than usual that morning. Jack stood at the entrance, his breath visible in the chilly air, watching his workers arrive one by one. Their faces showed concern. They'd all seen the newspaper headlines by now. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from suppliers and contractors wanting to review their agreements. An hour ago, he'd received the official notice. All defense contracts were temporarily suspended pending investigation. The paper in his pocket felt heavy, like a stone weighing him down. Mike, a former Marine who'd become his right-hand man, approached with a coffee cup. "Bad news coming, isn't it, boss?" Jack nodded slowly, his shoulders sagging. "Gather everyone in the break room. They need to hear it from me." The break room, with its mismatched chairs and donated furniture, had become their meeting place. Emily's colorful mural stretched across one wall, the words, "Hope lives here," now seeming to mock him. 40 pairs of eyes watched him as he stepped to the front, their worried expressions making his heart ache. "I've always believed in being straight with you all," Jack began, his voice rougher than usual. "This morning, I received notice that our contracts have been frozen due to the accusations in the media." He paused, swallowing hard. "I want you to know I'm fighting this with everything I've got, but for now, we're in troubled waters." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Sarah, a single mother of 3 who operated one of the precision machines, raised her hand. "Mr. Harlow, are we losing our jobs?" Her voice trembled. "What about our health insurance?" called out another worker. "My kid's got diabetes." "I just put a down payment on a house," someone else added desperately. Each question felt like a knife in Jack's chest. These people had trusted him, believed in his vision. Now their livelihoods hung in the balance because of lies spread by his enemies. "Listen to me," Jack said, raising his hands for quiet. "I promised when I hired each of you that this company would be different, that we'd stand together, treat each other like family." He looked around the room, meeting their eyes. "I'm not giving up on that promise. I've set aside emergency funds that will cover 2 weeks of full pay and benefits while we sort this out." Relief flickered across some faces, but worry remained. 2 weeks wasn't long. "What happens after 2 weeks?" Mike asked what everyone was thinking. Jack gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "I'm meeting with lawyers today. We'll fight these accusations. The truth will come out." He tried to sound more confident than he felt. "Until then, I need you all to keep working as usual. Show them what we're made of." The meeting broke up slowly, workers clustering in small groups, whispering among themselves. Jack watched them return to their stations, each step heavy with uncertainty. Mike lingered behind. "We're with you, Jack," he said quietly. "The vets especially. We know what kind of man you are." Jack managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Mike. Keep an eye on things today, will you? I've got some calls to make." The rest of the day passed in a blur of angry phone calls and emergency meetings. By evening, most workers had gone home, leaving Jack alone in the vast warehouse. The machines stood silent, like sleeping giants in the dimming light. He walked slowly through the empty space, footsteps echoing. Each workstation held a story. Thomas's perfectly organized tool rack, decorated with photos of his kids. Maria's collection of small succulents that somehow thrived in the industrial setting. The break room bulletin board covered with birthday cards and baby announcements. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical force. These weren't just employees. They were families, dreams, futures. He'd promised them all a chance at dignity, at rebuilding their lives. Now that promise was crumbling. Near Emily's mural, Jack's legs gave out. He sank to his knees on the cold concrete floor, the rough surface biting through his pants. Tears he'd held back all day finally broke free, running down his weathered cheeks. "Lord," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this fight anymore." The words echoed in the empty warehouse. These good people trusted me. Emily trusts me. I can't let them down. His shoulders shook as he continued his desperate prayer. "Please, give me strength. Show me the way forward. I'll accept whatever path you choose, but don't let these folks suffer for my failures." The tears fell freely now, dropping onto the concrete floor. In the growing darkness, Jack Harlow, veteran, grandfather, leader, knelt alone, stripped of everything except his faith and his prayer for guidance. Sunlight crept through the curtains of Jack's bedroom, painting warm stripes across his weary face. He hadn't slept much, tossing and turning as worries plagued his mind. The sound of careful footsteps in the hallway made him stir, followed by the gentle creak of his bedroom door. "Grandpa?" Emily's voice was soft and tentative. "Are you awake?" Jack opened his eyes to find his granddaughter balancing a tray with toast, scrambled eggs, and orange juice. Her pink pajamas were still on, her brown hair slightly messy from sleep. What caught his attention most was the determined look on her face as she concentrated on not spilling anything. "What's all this?" Jack asked, sitting up against his headboard. "I made you breakfast," Emily declared proudly, carefully placing the tray across his lap. "Well, Mrs. Wilson from next door helped with the eggs, but I did the toast all by myself." Jack noticed the toast was slightly burnt around the edges, but it only made his heart swell more. "That's mighty thoughtful of you, sweetheart." Emily climbed onto the bed next to him, tucking her feet under the blanket. I heard you crying last night, Grandpa. Jack's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He hadn't realized she'd heard him during his late-night prayer in his study. I'm sorry if I worried you, Emily. Don't be sorry. She reached for his free hand and squeezed it tight. Remember what you told me when Billy Thompson said my art was stupid? You said that mean people only win if we let their words hurt us more than the truth in our hearts. Jack set down his fork, amazed at how his own words of comfort were now being reflected back at him through the wisdom of a child. Those people at your old company, and the ones writing bad things about you, they're just like Billy Thompson, Emily continued. They're bullies. But I know who you really are, Grandpa. You're the man who helps Mrs. Wilson with her groceries even when your back hurts. You're the one who gave Mr. Rodriguez a job when nobody else would. And now he can buy medicine for his sick daughter. Tears welled up in Jack's eyes as Emily spoke. She reached up and wiped one away with her small finger. I believe in you, Grandpa, no matter what anybody says. And so do all the people at the warehouse. I heard them yesterday. They're scared, but they trust you. Jack pulled Emily into a tight hug, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. In that moment, he remembered sitting with his wife Margaret years ago, during another crisis. They'd been on their front porch swing, and he'd been ready to give up then too. Margaret's words came floating back, clear as day. The world will try to strip you down, Jack, but love and truth can't be voted out. They can't be bought or sold. They're like seeds that grow stronger the more someone tries to bury them. Emily pulled back from the hug and studied his face. You look different now, Grandpa. Less sad. That's because you helped me remember something very important, Jack said, finally taking a bite of the slightly burnt toast. Your grandmother used to say that truth and love are stronger than lies. And you know what? She was right. Grandma Margaret was smart. Emily nodded sagely, as if she'd known her grandmother personally, though she'd passed away before Emily was born. Is that why you named me after her, Emily Margaret Harlow? That's exactly why, Jack said, finishing his breakfast. And you're just as wise as she was. Emily beamed at the compliment, then grew serious again. So what are you going to do now, Grandpa? Jack swung his legs out of bed and stood up straight. His joints protested. They always did these days, but there was new energy in his movements. He walked to his dresser mirror and looked at his reflection. The man staring back at him wasn't the defeated figure from yesterday. His shoulders straightened naturally, his jaw set with determination. You know what I'm going to do, he said, watching Emily's reflection appear beside his own in the mirror. I'm going to fight back. Not with more lies or cruel words, but with the truth. Every single worker in that warehouse has a story that proves what kind of company we're building. Every veteran who found purpose again, every single parent who can now provide for their children, they're all part of the real story. Like Mrs. Rodriguez? Emily asked. She told me yesterday that before you gave her a job, she had to choose between paying rent or buying food. But now she can do both. Jack turned from the mirror to face his granddaughter. Exactly like that. The truth isn't in newspaper headlines or rumors. It's in the lives we've touched, the community we're building. Emily jumped up and down excitedly. Can I help? I could draw pictures of everyone's stories. That's actually a wonderful idea, Jack said, ruffling her hair. He looked back at his reflection one final time, seeing not just himself but the legacy of faith and integrity that Margaret had helped instill in him. The same values he now saw blooming in Emily. Standing tall, Jack spoke aloud, his voice firm and clear. It's time to fight with the truth. Emily slipped her small hand into his larger one. And I'll help you fight, Grandpa. We all will. The law office hadn't changed since Jack's last visit. Same worn leather chairs, same dusty law books lining the shelves, same tired coffee maker gurgling in the corner. But Jack had changed. Gone was the defeated man who'd stumbled in weeks ago. Today, his steps were purposeful as he strode through the door, his weathered face set with determination. Back so soon, Jack? Tom Wheeler, his longtime friend and attorney, looked up from behind his cluttered desk. His reading glasses sat low on his nose, and concern etched lines around his eyes. I need your help, Tom. Jack settled into the chair across from him. Those articles they're printing about me, they're not just lies. They're covering something up. I can feel it. Tom removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. What makes you think that? 20 years of running that company. I know every account, every contract, every signature required. Jack leaned forward. Something wasn't adding up even before they pushed me out. Tom nodded slowly and pressed the intercom button on his desk phone. "Sandra, hold my calls, please. And bring us the Harlow manufacturing files, all of them." For the next hour, they spread papers across Tom's desk. Financial statements, board meeting minutes, contract approvals. Jack's trained eye moved methodically through each document. His finger stopped suddenly on a page, tapping a series of numbers. "There," he said. "Look at these equipment purchases from last quarter." Tom adjusted his glasses. "What about them?" "The prices are inflated by at least 40%. And the vendor," Jack pulled out his phone, typing quickly. "Just as I thought. It's a shell company, registered to Marcus Thompson's brother-in-law." "Marcus Thompson? Your former CFO? The same one who led the vote to remove me?" Jack's jaw tightened. "They've been siphoning money through fake vendors." Tom whistled low. "That's serious, Jack. But we need more than just inflated invoices." They dug deeper. Sandra brought in more boxes, and the afternoon light faded to evening as they pieced together the puzzle. Jack's military training served him well. He'd always had an eye for detail, for patterns others might miss. "Here's another one," Tom said, holding up a document. "Your signature on this contract authorization from 3 months ago." Jack took the paper, studying it carefully. "That's not my signature." "You sure?" "Positive. Look at the loop on the J. I never write it that way. They forged it." Jack's hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. This was righteous anger now. Tom pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. Forged signatures, inflated invoices, shell companies. "Jack, this is more than just corporate politics. This is fraud." "Keep looking," Jack urged. "There has to be more." They found it in the email records. Printed conversations between board members, planning their takeover months in advance. They'd known about the defense contracts coming through. They'd orchestrated everything, down to the timing of the vote. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing to an email chain. "They even paid off 2 reporters at the local paper to run those stories about you." Jack sat back, running a hand through his silver hair. "All this time, they weren't just greedy. They were criminals. And now we can prove it." Tom gathered the damning documents into a neat pile. "What do you want to do with this, Jack?" Jack thought of Emily's tears when she came home from school. He thought of his workers, their families depending on their jobs. He thought of his late wife's words about truth being stronger than lies. "I want to call a town hall meeting," he said firmly. "Get everyone together, workers, townspeople, even the board members. It's time to bring everything into the light." Tom nodded approvingly. "I'll help you organize the evidence. Make it clear enough that anyone can understand what they did." They spent another hour carefully organizing the documents, making copies, highlighting the most damaging parts. Jack's hands moved with practiced precision, like he was field stripping a rifle, each piece in its place, ready for inspection. "The board won't go down without a fight," Tom warned as they finished. "They'll try to discredit you, maybe even threaten legal action." "Let them try." Jack's voice was steady. "I've faced worse odds in Vietnam. At least this time, I know I'm fighting for something right." Tom helped him pack everything into his briefcase, each document protected in clear plastic sleeves. The evidence of corruption was secure, ready to be revealed. "You know," Tom said, walking Jack to the door, "I've known you for 30 years. Watched you build that company from nothing. Never once saw you take a shortcut or compromise your values." Jack paused at the doorway. "My father taught me that a man's reputation is worth more than gold. These past few weeks, they tried to take that from me. But they forgot one thing." "What's that?" "The truth always finds its way to the surface, like a seed pushing through concrete." The evening air was cool as Jack stepped outside. He held his briefcase close, feeling the weight of the truth it contained. Looking up at the darkening sky, he whispered a quiet prayer. "Lord, guide me tomorrow." The words weren't just a plea for help. They were a soldier's quiet acknowledgement before battle, not with guns and grenades this time, but with truth against lies, integrity against corruption. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, Jack knew he was ready to face them. The walk to his car was steady, each step grounded in purpose. The briefcase felt lighter now, as if sharing its burden with someone stronger had eased its weight. Tomorrow would be a day of reckoning, but tonight, for the first time in weeks, Jack felt peace settling over him like a familiar old blanket. The old community hall buzzed with tension as townspeople filed in, filling the wooden chairs that creaked under their weight. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the crowd, highlighting worried faces and furrowed brows. At the front of the room, the board members sat in a row behind a long table, their expensive suits and confident smirks a stark contrast to the working-class audience. Marcus Thompson, the former CFO, leaned back in his chair, absently adjusting his silk tie. He whispered something to the board member next to him, and they both chuckled. Their laughter died when Jack Harlow walked through the double doors. The room fell silent. Jack moved deliberately down the center aisle, his worn leather briefcase in one hand. He'd chosen to wear his simple work clothes, clean but humble rather than a suit. Veterans scattered throughout the crowd nodded at him respectfully. Several of his workers offered encouraging smiles. Emily sat in the front row between two of Jack's most trusted employees, her small legs swinging nervously. She gave him a thumbs up as he passed, and Jack felt his heart swell with love and purpose. Marcus Thompson stood, his voice dripping with fake courtesy. "Well, Jack, you called this meeting. Though I must say, given the recent allegations against you, it seems rather desperate." Jack said nothing. He simply walked to the podium and began setting up his materials with military precision. His hands were steady as he arranged documents and connected his laptop to the projector. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jack began, his voice clear and strong, "I'm not here to defend myself against lies. I'm here to show you the truth." The first slide appeared on the screen, a series of financial documents. Jack pointed to specific lines, explaining in simple terms how the numbers didn't add up. He showed invoice after invoice from fake companies, all leading back to board members' relatives. "These equipment purchases?" Jack highlighted a column of figures. "Inflated by 40%, the money went straight into private accounts." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Marcus Thompson's smirk began to fade. "But that was just the beginning," Jack continued. He produced copies of emails, displaying them on the screen. "These messages show how they planned everything. They knew about the defense contracts months ago. They orchestrated my removal to take control." The murmurs grew louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Crooks!" Marcus Thompson shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. He's fabricating evidence. Every document has been verified by my attorney," Jack cut in calmly. "Who, by the way, is here with copies for anyone who wants to examine them." He gestured to Tom Wheeler, who stood at the side of the room with a thick stack of papers. Jack pulled out one more document. "And this? This is my signature on a contract I never saw." He held up his driver's license next to it. "Compare them yourself." The board members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their confident expressions had vanished, replaced by growing panic. "For weeks," Jack continued, his voice thick with emotion, "these men tried to paint me as a war profiteer. They spread lies about my character. They tried to destroy everything I built." He paused, looking directly at the board members. "But they forgot something important. Truth leaves tracks, and I've spent my life following tracks." A veteran in the third row suddenly stood up. "I served with Jack Harlow in Vietnam. He saved my life twice. You want to know about his character? Look at how he treats his workers with respect and dignity." Another veteran rose, then another. Soon, all the veterans in the room were on their feet. Jack's current employees began standing too, until half the room was up. Faces set with determination. "Jack gave me a job when no one else would," called out a single mother from the back. "He made sure I could work shifts that let me take care of my kids." More voices joined in, sharing stories of Jack's integrity and kindness. The board members began to shrink in their chairs as the tide of public opinion turned decisively against them. Marcus Thompson made one last desperate attempt. "This is all very touching, but the contracts, the Pentagon has already been notified," Jack interrupted quietly. "They're launching their own investigation. The contracts remain in my name, and they'll stay that way." The color drained from Marcus Thompson's face. Other board members started gathering their things, clearly eager to escape. "I don't want revenge," Jack said, his voice softening. "I just want the truth known. I want to keep building something that matters, something that helps our veterans, our workers, our community." The room erupted in applause. People began moving forward to shake Jack's hand or pat his back. The board members slipped out a side door, their dreams of easy wealth evaporating in the face of exposed truth. Through the crowd of well-wishers, a small figure darted forward. Emily wrapped her arms around Jack's leg, looking up at him with shining eyes. "I knew you were still my hero," she whispered. Jack bent down and hugged her properly, his eyes misting over. In that moment, with his granddaughter in his arms and the support of his community surrounding him, he felt the weight of recent weeks finally lifting from his shoulders. The truth had done its work, just as he'd known it would. The evidence hit like a thunderbolt. Documents displayed on the projector screen showed forged signatures, secret bank transfers, and backroom deals, all orchestrated by the board members who now sat frozen in their chairs, their faces draining of color. The packed community hall erupted in gasps and murmurs as Jack calmly walked through each piece of evidence, his voice steady and clear. Marcus Thompson, the board's chairman, jumped to his feet, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous. You can't possibly—" "Sit down, Marcus," came a firm voice from the back of the room. Sheriff Davidson strode down the center aisle, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. 2 deputies followed close behind. "We've seen enough." The other board members began to squirm in their seats. Richard Peters, the CFO, frantically shuffled through papers, his hands trembling. Sarah Wells, the marketing director who had led the smear campaign against Jack, stared at the floor, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. "These documents," the sheriff continued, "show clear evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. We'll need all of you to come down to the station." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the deputies began reading rights to the board members. Emily, who had been sitting in the front row, ran to Jack and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You did it, Grandpa," she whispered, her eyes shining with pride. Jack placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, then stepped forward. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Here was his moment of triumph, his chance for revenge against those who had tried to destroy him. But as he looked at the defeated faces of his former colleagues, he felt something unexpected. Pity. "Before you take them," Jack said to the sheriff, his voice carrying through the hushed hall, "I'd like to say something." He turned to face the board members, who couldn't meet his gaze. "What you did was wrong. You betrayed not just me but this entire community. You chose greed over integrity, lies over truth." He paused, taking a deep breath. Emily squeezed his hand, and he drew strength from her presence. "But I want you to know something. I forgive you." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The board members finally looked up, their expressions a mix of shock and confusion. "I'm not saying this to minimize what you did," Jack continued. "You'll have to face the consequences of your actions. But I hope that somewhere down the line, you'll find the courage to change. To remember that success built on lies is no success at all. That true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we treat others." Marcus Thompson's face crumpled, tears appearing in his eyes for the first time. Sarah Wells covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. The other board members stood in stunned silence, the weight of Jack's words settling over them. From the crowd, someone started clapping. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon the entire hall thundered with applause, not just for Jack's victory, but for his grace in triumph. Veterans stood at attention, offering silent salutes. Parents lifted their children to see, wanting them to witness this moment of moral courage. The sheriff gently led the board members toward the exit. As they passed Jack, Marcus paused. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said quietly, "but thank you." Jack nodded, then watched as they were escorted out. The crowd began to disperse, many stopping to shake his hand or pat him on the back. But Jack felt no desire to bask in the moment. Instead, he turned to Emily, who was beaming up at him. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" "Yes, Grandpa," she said, slipping her small hand into his. They walked out of the community hall together into the cool night air. Stars twinkled overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves. Emily skipped beside him, humming a tune from her school play. Jack took a deep breath, feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight of betrayal, anger, and uncertainty had lifted, replaced by something he hadn't expected to find: peace. For the first time since losing his company, since the smear campaign, since all the darkness that had threatened to overwhelm him, Jack felt truly free, not just from the board's schemes, but from the burden of bitterness he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Emily's skipping slowed to match his pace, and together they walked toward home, their shadows stretching long beneath the street lamps, moving forward into whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun streamed through the warehouse windows, casting long shadows across the bustling factory floor. The rhythmic hum of machinery filled the air, accompanied by the cheerful chatter of workers. Jack Harlow stood near the entrance, watching as his granddaughter Emily made her way between workstations, carrying a basket of homemade chocolate chip cookies. "Would you like one, Mr. Rodriguez?" Emily asked, offering the basket to a veteran who had lost his leg in Afghanistan. The man's weathered face broke into a warm smile as he selected a cookie. "Thank you, sweetheart. These remind me of the ones my mama used to make," Rodriguez said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Jack's heart swelled as he observed the scene. The warehouse, once abandoned and filled with shadows, now pulsed with life and purpose. Veterans worked alongside single parents and minorities, each person treated with the dignity they deserved. The Hope Lives Here mural Emily had painted still brightened the wall, its colors even more vibrant against the backdrop of productive machinery. At his desk in the corner office, really just a partitioned space with windows overlooking the floor, Jack reviewed the latest contracts. The numbers were better than he'd ever imagined. The defense contracts had been just the beginning. Other companies, impressed by the quality of work and the ethical standards of his operation, were lining up to do business. "Grandpa!" Emily's voice carried across the floor as she skipped toward his office, her cookie basket nearly empty. "Mrs. Thompson says the scholarship committee is ready for you." Jack nodded, gathering his papers. The scholarship program had been one of his first initiatives once the company stabilized. It provided education funding for children of veterans and single parents, ensuring they would have opportunities that might otherwise have been out of reach. In the conference room, local educators and community leaders sat around the table. Martha Thompson, a retired school principal, stood as Jack entered. "We've identified 20 deserving students for the first round," she announced, her eyes bright with excitement. "And the medical clinic downtown has agreed to partner with us for the healthcare program." Jack settled into his chair, reviewing the proposals before him. The company's success meant they could do more than just provide jobs. They could transform lives. The medical clinic would offer free care to veterans and their families, while job training programs would ensure a steady stream of skilled workers for the growing operation. "Let's make it 30 students," Jack said, making a note on the paper. "And add a mental health wing to the clinic. Too many of our veterans are still fighting battles inside their minds." The committee members exchanged pleased glances. This was why they had rallied behind Jack. He saw beyond profit margins to the human needs of his community. Back on the factory floor, Jack stopped to chat with workers at each station. He knew every name, every story. There was Mike, who'd struggled to find work after losing his arm in Iraq, now operating specialized equipment with impressive skill. Sarah, a single mother of 3, had been promoted to shift supervisor. Thomas, who'd battled PTSD, had found peace in the structured environment and supportive atmosphere. The sound system, installed at the workers' request, played a mix of classic rock and country. Someone was singing along to Johnny Cash, their voice carrying over the machinery. Laughter erupted from the break room, where a group was sharing lunch and stories. Emily appeared at Jack's side, slipping her small hand into his. "Grandpa, look what Mr. Chen taught me." She proudly showed him a paper crane she'd folded during her break from cookie distribution. "Beautiful, sweetheart," Jack said, squeezing her hand. "Just like you." They walked together through the warehouse, past the shipping area where crates were being loaded for delivery. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, catching the dust motes in golden beams. The air smelled of oil, metal, and fresh coffee from the break room. Jack paused at the base of the metal stairs leading to the observation platform. From there, he could see every corner of his new empire. Not an empire built on greed or betrayal, but on faith, compassion, and second chances. As he climbed the stairs, Emily behind him, the sounds of the factory rose up like a symphony. The steady percussion of machinery, the melody of human voices, the harmony of purpose and pride. He reached the platform and gripped the railing, taking in the scene below. Workers moved with confidence, their faces showing concentration rather than strain. Veterans who had once felt lost now stood tall, their skills and experience valued. Single parents who had struggled to make ends meet now earned wages that could support their families with dignity. The music changed to an upbeat tune, and someone whooped in appreciation. More voices joined in, singing along while hands remained steady at their tasks. This was more than a factory. It was a community, a family forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose. Jack's eyes misted as gratitude overwhelmed him. He remembered the dark days after being voted out, the bitter taste of betrayal, the fear of letting Emily down. But God had other plans, turning defeat into victory, despair into hope. From his vantage point, he could see Emily's mural clearly. "Hope lives here," painted in bright, bold letters. Below it, workers moved with purpose, veterans stood tall with dignity, and the future hummed with possibility. His heart felt so full it might burst, filled with thankfulness for this second chance to make a difference in the lives of others. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, bathing the factory floor in golden light. The machines hummed their steady rhythm, and the sound of laughter and music rose up from below, a testament to the joy that could be found in honest work and true community. The late afternoon sun cast long golden rays through the warehouse windows, creating a warm glow that made the freshly painted walls shine. Jack walked beside Emily, their footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor as they made their evening rounds. The warehouse had transformed over the past months, its walls now adorned with vibrant murals depicting veterans standing proud in their uniforms, families embracing, and scenes of hope and renewal. "Look, Grandpa," Emily pointed to her latest addition to the wall, a painting of butterflies emerging from their cocoons. "Miss Thompson helped me with the shading. She says it's like our factory, something beautiful coming from something that was sleeping." Jack squeezed her small hand, touched by her insight. "You're right about that, sweetheart." His eyes traveled across the workspace where machines hummed quietly, ready for tomorrow's shift. The scent of fresh paint mingled with machine oil and coffee from the break room, smells that had become synonymous with their new beginning. They paused at the central mural, the one Emily had painted during those first uncertain days. "Hope lives here" still shone brightly in rainbow colors, though now surrounded by photographs of their growing work family. Veterans learning new skills, single parents graduating from training programs, community celebrations. "Remember when this place was all dark and dusty?" Emily asked, wrinkling her nose at the memory. "Now it's like a giant rainbow." Jack chuckled, remembering those early days when doubt had gnawed at his confidence. The memory of that board meeting, of being voted out and humiliated, felt distant now, like a storm that had passed, leaving clearer skies in its wake. "You know, Emily," he said, leading her toward the window where the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, "sometimes the hardest moments in life lead us to the best ones." Emily nodded solemnly. "Like when Mommy went to heaven? That was the hardest thing ever, but then we got closer, didn't we, Grandpa?" Jack's throat tightened with emotion. "We sure did, sweetheart." They walked past the training room where Rodriguez was setting up for tomorrow's class. The veteran gave them a warm wave, his prosthetic leg gleaming in the evening light. On the wall behind him hung certificates of completion, dozens of them now, each representing a life changed, a future restored. "Mrs. Martinez told me her kids can go to college now," Emily said, skipping alongside Jack. "And Mr. Thompson doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore." And Sarah's daddy got his smile back. She stopped and looked up at Jack with those clear, innocent eyes that saw straight to the heart of things. "Grandpa, we made this place full of love, didn't we?" Jack had to take a deep breath to steady his voice. "Yes, we did, honey. You and me and everyone here, we all did it together." They reached the main doors, where the last rays of sunlight streamed in. The evening shift would be starting soon, but for now, the factory was peaceful. From somewhere in the building, they could hear singing, probably the veterans' choir practicing in the break room. The melody floated through the air, a hymn about grace and second chances. Emily tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Up, Grandpa," she requested, just as she had done since she was tiny. Though she was getting bigger, Jack could never resist this request. With a playful grunt, he lifted her into his arms, her weight familiar and precious. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and together, they looked out at their factory, their beacon of hope. The setting sun had turned all the windows to gold, and inside, lights were beginning to flicker on, creating a warm glow that seemed to pulse with life. The singing grew louder as more voices joined in, a spontaneous chorus of joy and gratitude. Emily hummed along, resting her head on Jack's shoulder. Behind them, their factory glowed like a lighthouse in the gathering dusk, a testament to faith, compassion, and the power of starting again. They stood there, grandfather and granddaughter, their shadows long in the sunset, both wearing matching smiles of contentment. The factory that had once been a symbol of loss had become something far greater, a place where hope wasn't just a word painted on a wall, but a living, breathing reality that changed lives every single day. Through the open doors, the evening breeze carried the scent of summer flowers from Emily's garden, another of her projects to make the place prettier. The garden had started as a few tentative seedlings and had grown into a riot of colors, much like their dreams for this place had blossomed beyond anything they'd imagined. Jack held Emily close, feeling the weight of all they'd accomplished settle around them like a warm embrace. The factory continued to hum with life behind them, a symphony of purpose and promise, while the choir's voices rose in perfect harmony, a song of redemption, of love, and of coming home. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Harlow, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.